essentially saying that yes, you need to believe in Jesus, but you still needed to keep the law. You needed to keep principles. You needed to keep a set of rules. You needed to obey. And that's the ground now of your salvation. In other words, salvation is not based on a promise that Paul preached that you believe, but salvation is based on a performance. And you know, like I know, if salvation is based on our performance, then we're all screwed. Because our performance is flawed at best. Are you hearing me? Yeah. So on the one hand, the Judaizers say that the way you're saved, you achieve salvation. Paul says you don't achieve salvation, you receive salvation. The Judaizers were trying to create a kind of religion that says that you're saved by works and you remain saved by works. And Paul comes along and says that is blasphemy to the gospel. It undoes the gospel. It turns the gospel inside out. You become, when you go down this nasty trail, you become like the professional plate spinners that you've seen on different TV shows that can take a beam and put a plate on top of the beam and spin that plate, and then take another beam and put another plate on top of that beam and spin that plate, and then take another beam and then take a plate and put that on top of that beam and spin, and then keep all these plates spinning at the same time. And what happens most of the time in our Christianity is that we become like the professional plate spinner. You know what I'm saying? You become a Christian and you say to yourself, you know what? I really want to get serious with the Lord. So what do? So you go to someone that seems a little more spiritual than you. And you say, man, how do I grow on my walk? And they say, well, first thing you need to do is dig into the Bible. So you go to the Christian supply store and you get you a big, nice, bright, white Bible. Or you go get grandma's Bible, right? With the nice gold lining around it, right? And you open it up and you start reading it, right? Because somebody told you you needed to read your Bible if you wanted to grow in your walk. So you get your beam and you get your Bible plate, stick it on top of your beam, and start spinning that plate. Then after a while, you're reading your Bible, and the Bible starts getting dry. So you say to yourself, what do I need to do now? Because the Bible's starting to get dry. So you go to somebody in the church, and they're a noted prayer warrior, and you go to them and you say, look, you know, my Bible time has been dry. I need just a little extra to get me over the top. And they say, oh, honey, sweetheart, look, what you need, I mean, reading the Bible is good, but you need to be in prayer. And in fact, Jesus even told the disciples, could you not tarry an hour? So you say, well, I need to at least, well, let me take baby steps. An hour is a little long. Let me start with 10 minutes. So what you do is that you get your beam and you get your prayer plate and stick it on top of the beam and you start spinning your prayer plate. But you got to keep the Bible plate spinning, right? Then after a while, you know, you end up at, you know, you go to church and you realize that you've been living selfishly. And, you know, you've been watching some of the, National Geographic channels about people in other third world countries, and you say to yourself, I'm living selfish, I need to do something, so I need to start giving some of my income to that. And so what you end up doing is you get a beam, and then you get your giving plate, you stick your giving plate on top of the beam and start spinning the plate, right? But you got to keep the prayer plate spinning, right? And you got to keep the Bible plate spinning because good Christians spin plates, right? Then all of a sudden you go to church, right? And the pastor has a missionary month, right? And they bring some missionary from some other country that's really putting it on the line. And they tell you all the grandiose stories about how God is moving in Timbuktu. And you say to yourself, in your nice, comfortable, church seat, and you're driving your nice, comfortable car, living in your nice, comfortable neighborhood, living your nice, comfortable life. You say to yourself, I need to be putting it on the line like that. Or at least be doing something. So you get a beam and you get your sacrifice plate and you start spinning your sacrifice plate. So over time, you spin the sacrifice plate, the prayer plate, the Bible plate, and your giving plate. And all of a sudden, over time, you don't just have 4 plates that you're spinning. You have 10 to 15 after you've been serving God for a while. And guess what ends up happening over time? What happens is you start becoming rote and mechanical in your Christianity. It's not fresh. It's not alive. It's not real anymore because most of your Christianity has been reduced down to duty. It's been reduced down to work. It's been reduced down to you just taking these plates and spinning them. You see what I'm saying? And many times we allow these plates to define us. And what ends up happening is that these plates that are plates that God gives us as a means of experiencing God's work and grace in our life, now we use them to try and earn God's grace and work in our life. We become spiritual plate spinners and use it as a way of earning salvation instead of looking to Christ, who spun the plates for us so that we can experience his finished work. And so Paul here in Galatians verse 1, in chapter 4, verse 1 through 7, Paul says that there's two categories of people. And Kevin read it so eloquently. He says there's two categories of people. The first category is the child. And the second category is the slave. And he said they look exactly the same, except they function on two different principles. You see, on the one hand, the slave works for emancipation. He works to get free. And Paul says, you go down this road like the Judaizers, you're always trying to free yourself. You never experience the freedom that Christ offers. You never have the joy, you never have the power, you never have the peace. You're always filled with anxiety. You're never comfortable with where you're at because you're always trying to set yourself free. And so you go to the next revival meeting, you go to the next event, you go to the next conference, you read the next book because you don't understand the far-reaching realities of what Christ accomplished on the cross. And so you're not fully emancipated in your head, even though Christ says, look, I did it all. That's the slave. He's not emancipated. But the child works because he's been emancipated. He realizes that even when he blows it and makes some mistakes and sins and does some horrible things, he realized that it flows out of a lack of believing God in that area of his life. See, when you fall morally, the easiest thing for us to do is find some scriptures on how immorality is sin and that we need to stop. And so we get some scriptures and we start reading those scriptures because we know that having sex outside of marriage is wrong, right? That's not how God wired sex to be. So we get some scriptures, we lay them on our heart, we think about it, we meditate, we get into an accountability group, we go to church and pray and do all these things because we don't want to fall, but underneath it, there's a desire to still go back and do it. Are you with me this morning? But the real reason why I fall into sexual immorality is because I really believe that sex act will be more satisfying to my soul than Christ. And that's the problem. But when you really are empowered by the gospel, when Jesus has come in and totally transformed your life, you work in such a way, you understand that you've been free. You don't have to get free of this. You're free. You need to walk in that freedom. You see, a slave works to get wealthy, but when you look in this text, it says that the child is an heir. You know what an heir is? And Paris Hilton, she's rich, but she got rich off of someone else. That's what an heir is. An heir didn't earn those riches. They got those riches because of who they inherited them from. And so when Paul talks about here about the child and the slave, when he says that the child is an heir, he's talking about the person that lives in light of the gospel, that they understand that everything that they are and have comes from God's hand. I was on my way to Portland, Oregon. I lived half my life in Portland, Oregon. And I picked up a GQ magazine on my way up just for some reading for my 2-hour flight.